Moinishet Zabine, a young Ethiopian girl, grew up in a rural area where kidnap and rape are a frequent occurrence. In the Ethiopian countryside, if a young man has his eye on a woman but does not have the money to pay the dowry, then he and several of his friends often kidnap the girl and proceed to rape her. By doing this, the odds of the man marrying the woman are greatly improved because she is now considered ruined. Oftentimes, the risks to the boy are minimal since the girl's parents never prosecute rapists. That would only harm the daughter's reputation further. At the time of Moinishet's rape, Ethiopian law actually stated that a man could not be prosecuted for violating a woman that he later married. This becomes catastrophic because these young girls are often forced into these marriages with the very men that raped them and are put in the position to live out their lives with the constant risk of sexual violence towards them. This story illustrates the continuing vulnerability of women across the globe. First, I'd like to further explain the extent of the problem of violence towards women. Second, I'll highlight one significant cause, which is the lack of education. And finally, how we can reduce this kind of violence. According to Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Wu Dunn, authors of Half the Sky, women aged 15 through 44 are more likely to be maimed or die from male violence than from cancer, malaria, traffic accidents, and war combined. Violence against women by an intimate partner is a major contributor to the ill health of women. According to Webster Dictionary, violence simply means the use of physical force to harm someone, to damage property, or a great destructive force of energy. But I would argue that violence goes far beyond this physical definition. Violence can happen psychologically and can't always be seen as clearly as physical violence, but it can be just as destructive. Violence against women, both physical and psychological, is a global problem in today's world. According to the authors of the book Teaching Peace, violence means two things. First, destruction to a victim, and second, by overpowering means. Violence is destruction to a victim by means that overpower the victim's consent. According to the American Psychological Association, psychological violence and lack of freedom can be very harmful to young women and girls. In a traditional family setting, the wife is often financially dependent on the male and can't even afford to leave. Most violence that occurs against women is considered a private family matter and seldom, if ever, receives any kind of legal attention. If a woman does report violence, she is often shunned from her family of origin and not allowed to return home to her parents. She's typically illiterate and unaware of her legal rights, so she soon finds her way back to the marriage, deciding to suffer in silence within the relationship. According to MalalaFund.org, every 3 seconds a girl becomes a child bride. This means she is sent to live with her husband without an education, without financial support of her own, and is forced to give up much of her freedom. This type of psychological damage is detrimental to the lives of young girls across the globe and can be seen as one kind of violence that women can endure. Now, there are many causes for this problem, but the one I want to focus on is the lack of education. Nicholas Kristof, author of Half the Sky, says, "One study after another has shown that education is one of the most effective ways to fight poverty. Schooling is also often a precondition for girls and women to stand up against injustice and to be integrated into the economy." Ethan Eschbach, a Mennonite Economic Development Associate representative who was on campus a few weeks ago, told a story about a project that Mita has been working on to empower local women. Mita has been teaching these local women to grow lima beans. After teaching these women, a woman reported to Ethan, "My husband doesn't beat me anymore because I make more money than him, and he needs me now." When education is present, these young girls and women are capable of amazing things. The story of Day Moonji illustrates the link between the lack of education and psychological violence. Day grew up in a rural part of China and lived with her family in a small shack on the outskirts of town. Her family, being extremely poor, made Day drop out of school before completing the 6th grade in order to help out with the housework. Her parents were too poor to pay the $13 fee for school for the year, and frankly didn't see a point in an education for Day when her future included hoeing fields and sewing socks. After an article was written about Day's story and others like her, the Morgan Guaranty Trust Company made a generous gift and offered to pay for Day to finish her education. After receiving a high school degree and finishing accounting school, she found work as an accountant for local factories and soon became the sole financial supporter of her family and the equivalent of a financial tycoon. These few extra years of schooling allowed her more freedom, and Day is now less vulnerable to all forms of violence as well. This is a perfect example of what the power of education can do for these young girls. When education is present in women, physical violence is often decreased as well. According to the Huffington Post and the Global Education Fund, the correlation between education and preventing violence against women is a strong one. When a girl in a developing country receives 7 or more years of education, she marries 4 years later and has 2.2 fewer children. Now, this is in a world where 39,000 girls younger than 18 get married every single day, and currently 31 million girls worldwide are out of school. This statistical evidence speaks volumes. Education is a tangible solution for so much violence towards women, both physical and psychological. When education is present, women have the freedom to choose what kind of life they want to live and are not forced into violent situations. So what can we, as people of the Peace Church, do to help this global epidemic? As the Mennonite Church, we have a philosophy of social change for the sake of peace. Donald B. Crable says in his book, The Upside Down Kingdom, "The kingdom of God is a collectivity, a network of persons who have yielded their hearts and relationships to the reign of God." There are 2 solutions that I feel would best reflect this Peace Church philosophy. The first solution is an ambitious one. Many young girls don't have access to an education because they don't have access to a school. Often small rural villages are not equipped with a school in the area, so children have to walk far distances, and it can be expensive for parents to send their kids to school, so they typically only send the male children. If there were more schools located in these villages, attaining an education for girls would be more achievable. Build On is a nonprofit organization that allows you to either donate funds to help you build schools in developing countries, or actually raise the funds yourself and travel to these developing countries and build the schools. This is a good opportunity for church congregations or even regional Mennonite conferences to help out with on a much larger scale. The second solution is on a more individual scale, or possibly a congregational one. There are many organizations which help to sponsor the education of young girls globally. Many of you know the story of Malala, the young Pakistani girl who was shot in the forehead for speaking out about the need for education for women. Malala is not only an inspiration to the global community, as well as the youngest ever Nobel Peace Prize winner, but she has also founded an organization called the Malala Fund, where you can make donations to help one of the 4 countries they are trying to provide equal education opportunities to. Compassion International is a site our campus pastor Tig recommended for sponsoring children. On this site, you make monthly donations to a specific child you choose to sponsor. A friend of mine and I are sponsoring a 9-year-old girl together who lives in Bolivia named Ana Lara, who we will be able to visit when we travel to Bolivia this summer for our cross-cultural experience. Ana's parents are sometimes employed with various temporary jobs, and Ana herself works making beds and running errands. Between my friend and I, it is only $18 a month, and it is changing a little girl's life. It is giving her the opportunity to graduate with a high school diploma. Both of these solutions can help these young girls get access to an education, which, as we have seen, can greatly improve their quality of life. Without an education, there is no freedom of choice, feeling of safety, or of equality. For Woynachet, the woman whose story I told at the beginning, standing by while terrible violence happened to her and around her was not enough. She stood up for herself and escaped this cycle of vicious violence. Woynachet and her family actually pressed charges against her rapist, and she refused to marry him, which meant that he was sentenced to 10 months in prison. Moinishet and her father moved out of their rural town and started a new life in the city. Women across the globe are trying to stand up against all forms of violence, and as people of the Peace Church, I believe it is our responsibility to reach out to them and do what we can to help spread peace and equality to those who need it most. So in closing, I want to call you to action, to be proactive about a solution to this global crisis. I encourage all of you to visit one of the sites I mentioned earlier and donate or sponsor a young girl's education, because a small act by many people is what leads to progress and to change. So let's come together as people of the Peace Church and have a positive impact on these girls' lives. Thank you.